Now, Apothecary Diaries is really the dark horse of this fall anime season. Well, the term dark horse is quite relevant because it's only a dark horse in the more Western anime community. Because in Japan, this show and the novel this show was based on is hugely popular. Now, how popular do you ask? Well, in terms of all the light novel sales total, this novel actually sold fifth among all light novels throughout history. Just to give you a little bit of context, Overlord is 12th place on this list. ReZero is also 12th place. This light novel sold for more than 21 million copies as of May of 2023. Whereas ReZero was 11 million and Overlord was 11 million. You can argue that this basically outsold Overlord and ReZero combined. Well, if you're interested in the list, the top one is Reincarnated as a Slime. Second place is the Scientific Railgun and Magical Index series. Third place is Sword Art Online. And fourth place is Irregular in Magical High School. And this actually outsold Suzumiya Haruhi in 5th place overall. Just to show how popular this is. In terms of light novel sale in Japan, anything like over 5 million copies sold, that's already hugely popular, and this is quadruple that. If you think about it, Toradora was 5 million copies total, and Wolfen Spice also 5 million copies. And those were, considered pretty popular and famous shows back then. So this was no surprise to the Japanese, and it's really like a long time coming. People were anticipating an anime out of this. It's just that in the West, we probably haven't heard of either the novel or even like aware that it's gonna get animated or even are interested in what they are. Now, the problem I see is this is a Japanese novel of a fictional kingdom based on Chinese culture. So I'm assuming in the West that's like a barrier because a lot of more like history and culture inspired anime generally have they've generated less interest in the West, mainly due to you kind of have to have somewhat of a background knowledge going in order to enjoy it as much as say Japanese who are more aware of at least ancient Chinese culture. Or if you're Chinese, then it's perfectly fine for you. Now, as a Westerner, it might be very intimidating to a sense, and it also makes you lose interest compared to some like pure fantasy setting where you don't have to know anything. But here's the thing, since it is a dark horse in this season, it's worth your time to actually get to know the background a little bit to help you be on the same page as a Japanese or Chinese or like an Asian audience. Now, the reason why I'm making these videos is not a review or a reaction. Those things have been done, and I don't think I'll add too much to it by simply doing a review or reaction. I see this as an appendix or toolkit for each episode of the show to help you guys actually enjoy it a little bit better. Now, because of the nature of like an appendix where I do explain certain cultural aspects to you guys, this is gonna be filled with spoilers. I suggest that if you're really like not into spoilers, then please watch this video after you watch it the first time. But I'll try to keep spoilers in the minimum. Whatever I spoil in quotation really is there to just give you a cultural context. I feel like that's gonna be way more helpful. Now, what makes me qualified to do this? Well, by trade, I am a medical interpreter and a translator between the Chinese and English language. So I have the background. I'm Chinese Canadian, so like I have the cultural background. I'm an anime fan for about, like 20 years. So I have the community background, and also I am interested in history and culture, so I do have certain background in that aspect as well. So with all that said, if you're really interested in this show and want to know a little bit more about the background or be on the same page as anyone, and if this interests you, then let's continue. We'll start with the first episode, and each episode will be different lengths, mainly due to the fact that content is different depending on the episodes, but we'll start with the first. And only the stuff that I feel are probably going to be only background knowledge are going to be mentioned. I won't be talking about every single thing or every single aspect in detail. So let's get started with the first episode. Now, for the first scene in the anime, we're shown with this yellow flower with like a shamrock or clover-like plant instead of the main character. Our main character's name is Maomao, and according to the author, this plant is actually known as the Maomao grass. Well, here's the problem. This is what I think probably a misidentification by either the author. I don't think it's by the author, it's more by the animator and manga artist, that they've actually mistaken one plant with the other. Now, just hear me out, okay? The author wrote on page what they're supposed to look like. But here's the thing. This is a yellow flower with basically a clover design. So actually, this is known as a wood sorrel or a false shamrock. It's not a clover, and it's somewhat of medicinal, widely grown throughout Asia, especially China. Some of them have red flower, some of them, like this, have yellow flower. And here's a picture of it. Sure, but it is not known as Maomao plant. What's known as Maomao plant, or like catfoot plant, is a different flower. Now you'll be thinking that, how could they? Or like they probably know something that I don't, so they didn't make a mistake. Well, who can blame them? This is a picture of the said plant. The similar kind of yellow flower, similar kind of shrubby little plant, and there's similarly medicinal plants. So I'm quite confident that maybe they've actually basically just didn't realize that and put this in instead. But nonetheless, it doesn't hurt the show overall. It's just an interesting tidbit. Next up, we have Maomao's dad's apothecary shop. Quite typical Asian apothecary shops. They've done a very good job in a lot of sceneries in this show. Now, not all of them are straight up copies. Not all of them are like perfect, but many of them are great. Basically, this is what the shop looks like. This is what a typical apothecary shop in China nowadays, or in any local Chinatown you guys have nowadays, will look like. If you guys have a Chinatown. Oh, who am I kidding? You guys obviously have a Chinatown in your city. So yeah, that's very good actually. And next up, we have basically more of the poorer side of residents. And yeah, these were typical of what you expect from a more, I'd say, urban kind of like a setting actually in ancient China. Not very rich, but more urban nonetheless. Now, what's interesting about this show in particular is that it's actually based on a combination of Chinese eras in total. If you think about it, it's like merging different aspects of different dynasties, different time period in China into one. I've had this person argue with me that this is based on 18th century China because later on certain technology showed up. I mean, it is a fictional world, and I think you're reading a little bit too much into it, and you're ignoring everything else if you don't think about different aspects of cityscape. Basically, the window pane is very 16th century onward Chinese, whereas the building type, they're pretty typical ever since 5th century, basically. And then we see the market street, traditional older Chinese market, ancient markets. You have kiosks everywhere, they sell everything back then, And for a period of time, this really went out of fashion because efficiency was emphasized. Roads were made for cars only. But now there's a revival and comeback. There's a lot of pedestrian streets in China now. And they're beginning to try to rebuild whatever this is. And markets are usually associated with entertainment. That's also in quotation. And literally brothels. What do we know? We have brothels. This scene in particular is very interesting because she's wearing like a traditional Chinese underwear. Actually, like non-gendered underwear. Guys can wear this as an underwear as well. But it's more famous that ladies do it. Come on, guys. This is not for lewd reason. This is straight up just. This is what Chinese wear as underwear back in like older time, before modernity, before say the 19th and 20th century, where the Western kind of influence really came in. And what you see is a lot of hairstyles in this. These are more typical, maybe Han to Tang Dynasty hairstyle. Not the hairstyle you guys usually associate with China, actually. What you associate with China is generally the Fu Manchu kind of hairstyle that was really forced upon, China when the Manchurians actually conquered China. Now, here's another argument. Some people say that since Manchurians weren't like Chinese or Han Chinese back then, that they are not Chinese. I'd argue the opposite, because most of the Western world came to know China after the Qing Dynasty, after the Manchurians came in after 16th century. So whatever idea you have about China is the Manchu influenced China. So how could you say that they're not China? They might not be Han, but they're China nonetheless. And you see these kind of hairstyle. They are pretty typical of basically 16th century BC all the way up until 16th century for about 3,000 years. And you see various examples throughout history and of that hairstyle. Now, Maomao's here in an apothecary shop with storage. Once again, these drawers are very typical of any like traditional Chinese medicine shop you'll find anywhere. They also have a raised bed, which is interesting because for a certain period of time, especially the Tang Dynasty in 6th century, Chinese have a mixture of sitting on chairs and sitting on flat surfaces. And before that, Chinese sat on flat surfaces. If you think about it, that's what the Japanese do, basically, sitting on a flat surface. You don't associate that with Chinese because I guess from 9th century onward, that kind of went out of fashion. But this is basically what you find in like a 6th century Chinese room setting. And whatever stuff dangling on the rooftop, all the background drawers are very typical of apothecary shops or like medicine shops in that period. This is, it is a brothel. And let's be straight, brothels are basically a combination of places where you go for, more sexual stuff and places of entertainment. Go for these courtesans, and not necessarily for sex, because some of them don't really offer that. Some of them were more high-class entertainer. So, as anything, either you go for sex or go for entertainment, stuff might happen. So this is more like a medic office inside the building, like any other traditional Chinese medicine place. Then you have the madam, which has a very specific and peculiar hairstyle, which is very similar to one of the hairstyle in this chart, almost like a carbon copy. So yeah, and then this thing basically, people were trying to figure out what this is. This is ladies getting ready and getting dressed up. And this particular style dress is kind of hard to put on by yourself because it is not strapped down to anything. You literally use your thighs to hold it in place. And you need the help of another to actually tighten it because it is very hard for you to tighten yourself. And what's interesting is this scene is almost scene from scene from 2006's Curse of Golden Flower by Yimou Zhang, a famous Chinese director who also directed Hero, acted by Jet Li. But they have a scene exactly like this, which is this. And I'm pretty sure people who drew this actually saw that movie, or people who told the people who drew this saw that movie. So this is very interesting. It's exactly the same copy as that. And then we have Maomao basically gonking over all the plant. If you guys are interested, I can talk about different medicinal plants in this show. Some of them are very accurate. They're not grass in the background. They're all medicinal plants. And to be honest, that's the thing about Chinese medicine, is that basically all plants are medicinal plants, even the poisonous ones. And all medicinal plants are a little bit poisonous to one way or the other, but if you use in moderation, it can help you with certain ailments. Kind of very interesting analogy, an interesting character analogy with Maomao. And then this, just straight up Forbidden Palace. Well, I wouldn't say straight up Forbidden Palace, but close enough, considering Forbidden Palace looks like this. And this is basically that. It's everywhere except for the gates, which is very interesting. I assume they kind of want to make it just a little bit different. Plus, they're probably not that familiar with actual Chinese gates in particular. So they kind of took a panoramic picture and then just added in the gates later on. But this is Forbidden Palace wintertime. I have a picture of almost the exact same angle as this one, and you can see the similarities. Now, in the Forbidden Palace, there are many plants grown, not in the central court though. Central court is almost all barren, mainly to actually show like a solemnness. Plants were in concentration in the Imperial Garden in the back, which this show actually used a lot of Imperial Garden buildings as influence for certain buildings. So, as a guy who actually just went to Beijing pretty recently in October, this almost goes into Uncanny Valley, because certain buildings in this show that are supposed to be the residence of certain people generally don't make that much sense in terms of what they are based on and what the actual purpose are. For example, this is supposed to be the palace that Lady Li Hua resides in. If you take a look, this kind of screen door, well, almost exact same kind of screen in Forbidden Palace. They just have words written on it. What's interesting is that this particular residence was reserved for the emperor's mom. So not the emperor, but the emperor's mom. And yeah, for them to actually use this for one of the concubines is, well, somewhat uncanny and somewhat interestingly out of place. And then we have Lady Li Hua. By the way, her name actually has certain meanings, generally because of the language. I mean, Japanese language uses a lot of kanji or Chinese characters. So an average Chinese might not speak Japanese. I mean, I learned a little bit, but like an average Chinese might not speak any Japanese, but when they read names, they can have the same conclusion and understanding as a Japanese, whereas in the West, we'll learn the pronunciation of Japanese words and Japanese names. The meaning, on the other hand, you can't really tell. Interestingly enough, Li Hua's name means pear flower. Just keep that in mind. So basically, and a lot of the subtitles actually just wrote that she gave birth to a prince, which isn't exactly accurate, because the specific term they used was togu, which is basically word used for the crown prince. Now, this implies the emperor has no other sons. This is his only alive son. Let's put it that way. You know, like, if the emperor has previous sons, they all have passed away. So this is the only son he has alive. And we can tell, judging by the address people give during this birth scene. So keep that in mind. And then this is 3 months later. This is another scene of the Forbidden Palace. Basically, Imperial Palace, but basically it's a Forbidden Palace. If you take a look, only thing that's missing are the corner buildings, which just looks like this. Everything else is almost all intact. Interesting enough, we see this plant again, which is a rhododendron. And rhododendrons are quite popular in China. They're almost grown everywhere as decorative plants. Then we have this thing about Maomao craving skewers. To be honest, skewers are a big thing in China. They were a big thing in China, and they still are a big thing in China. You go to any Chinese night market, should you go to China, you find skewer stands everywhere. And they're amazing. They're tasty, not expensive, and quite literally just snacks for the not so rich. And interestingly enough, it has a very long history. This is a stone carving about 2,000 years ago about people cooking skewers. Literally meat on a stick. Now if you take a look at the background, also very good job in replicating what building pillars and brackets are like in the Imperial Palace. And then we have the fact that a lot of palace servant girls can't really read. Well, a lot of palace servant guys couldn't really read back then. So yeah, reading ability to read and write and being literate was considered quite a big asset. You could get a promotion. And it is pretty true. It's actually quite accurate. And what's interesting is that they've shown this tablet that this other girl shows Maomao. And there isn't something exactly identical to this, but there are wooden or more expensive metal or even like ivory tablets used by palace workers to show that which department they belong to and grant them access as basically a worker ID that they carry on them. That's very interesting that they showed this because similar things did exist back then. And then we have this thing of the rooftop. What's interesting is that only the Forbidden City and temples were allowed this color scheme, basically yellow rooftop with red walls. Generally, even if you're an average rich person, or if you're anyone else, you're not allowed to have this color combination. If we think about what we saw a bit earlier, the brothels have green kind of rooftop, and that's particular as well. That's not restricted to brothels, but they are famous for using that kind of roof tile. They're more expensive, but they gather more attention. They grab your attention more. And then we have this thing with Lady Gyokyo, which once again, her name literally writes as jade leaf. Kinda makes sense for her to have jade green eyes. Now that you think about it, because her name means jade leaf. What she's in is more or less a Chinese looking bed. Chinese bed usually have a bed frame and the curtains like this. Although the only complaint I have is that they're drawn too big. Usually Chinese beds are a little bit more snug. At most twin size, not this big. Even the imperial ones, like especially the imperial ones, they're quite small. They're not this big. But the aesthetic, the structure, is pretty accurate. That's more than I could say for the decorations in the room though, because all the concubines' rooms are seen filled with decoration that are a little bit too densely populated for your like traditional Chinese taste. Usually Chinese decorations are like this thing. They're more sparsely spaced apart. They're not that crammed together, and whatever they've done with interior design, they've kind of condensed it all together. It looks a little bit too excessive, if I can put it nicely. But they're there. They look like Chinese decoration. They just look like a concentrated version of Chinese decoration. If you can call concentrated juice, well, yeah, that's what it is. Remember I talked about Li Hua living in the building which was supposed to be residence of the emperor's mom? Well, here's the problem. Like, the building that they depict Gyokyo to be living in, which is exactly based on this one, is actually a viewing pavilion. And the inside looks kind of like the inside like this. However, it's not filled with furniture. It's actually filled with a indoors garden structure, so you can't really live in it. But then, once again, the outside looks inconspicuous enough, you can assume whatever. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of the Chinese community were debating on whether this show was accurate, depicting some of the palace servants as being kidnapped, because it is kind of contradictory to most Chinese understanding of how palace servants were selected. Funnily enough, we don't have a record of servant girls being kidnapped, but we do have a record where eunuchs, those guys that are castrated, being kidnapped. Some of them were kidnapped kids. It's kind of easy to understand the more you think about it. All women in the real palace has a potential to be, impregnated by the emperor. So you kind of want to know their background. You don't get a kidnapped person and have no idea what their families are like. But for the eunuchs, most guys would prefer to have their private parts intact and not be cut off. And most families would not want to trade their kids, penis for a position in like a rare palace. Now I say most, not all. There were still people that are willing to trade that for more or less a good enough permanent employment, but not all of them were. Usually only people who were poorest of the poor. So there were cases where people actually kidnap other young boys and castrate them and send them in to be eunuchs, but not girls. So that's a little bit creative liberty the author has to basically push the show forward. And then we have this at the very end of the episode, which is a very typical design for a Chinese military flag. Now, China for the longest time doesn't have a national flag, because China for the longest time was really an isolated society that there is no equal to China throughout most of Chinese history in the surrounding areas. Therefore, they didn't need identification for what is China, other than for military actions. So these kind of flag design with a rectangular shape and then a few protrusion at the very end was a very typical Chinese war flag design all the way until the 13th century. What's interesting is that there's a character written on here in seal form, in seal script form, rather than your standardized form of writing. And but it is understandable. It reads as li, which is the first word in the fruit lychee, which looks like this. Something tells me the author really likes the fruit, because not only the design of the flag has this word on it, which usually means a country name. Basically, our fictional country is named after a fruit that is red, and the background of the flag is red. It has a circular background design. I'm pretty sure the author likes lychee very, very much. It is a very good fruit. It tastes very sweet, very strong, and there's a strong kind of fragrance, and also no strong and weird flavor compared to other fruit. If you think about durian and other kind of fruit, even pineapple has certain weird odor, but lychee's great, or lychee, or in Mandarin it's called lychee, or in Cantonese it's called lychee. But anyways, basically it's that kind of fruit. And then we see the designs of soldiers in the camp, and here's why there's another example. This show was based on a combination of different time periods. Even though the clothes of most average citizen and regular people we've met so far are of more Tang Dynasty and some Han Dynasty design. These armor were pretty typical of older dynasties, especially the ones worn by the first emperor of China. We have a classic example of this in the terracotta warrior armies, and they have armors almost identical to this. So that's why we have a combination of everything. We took aspects of certain part of culture, and this is not a linear and carbon copy of a certain specific time period. Now, one thing I noticed is that a lot of reviewers generally will, for reasons I don't really agree with, skip the ending and skip the preview for next episode. I don't like doing that because sometimes there are after credits, and when you have to be told about after credits and like skipping until the very end, then you're missing part of the experience. The whole idea of the opening and ending is designed for you to actually sit through. And for this show and a lot of shows like this, there's also a chibi formed short that's tagged after the ending, releasing after the episode releases. For this show in particular, the chibi form extra is usually, I think, 1 minute long. And what it does is it basically explains whichever science or medicinal knowledge that's involved in this particular episode. You notice I didn't talk about the case in this episode, which is face powder and lead poisoning, because they did discuss about it in the ending short. I don't feel like I need to do that in detail. You can just go ahead and watch the ending short. They're fun, they're short, and they basically involve our two main characters talking. The only thing I'd like to add is that in case if people are wondering why people put themselves through potential poisoning and death, the alternative to lead face powder back then was mostly either chalk, which dries up your skin and hurts your skin, or rice powder. I don't know if you guys ever cooked, but rice powder, when met with water, becomes very clumpy and not really good looking. If you want to see what not very good face powder looks like, there's actually a good example in Pirates of the Caribbean 3. One of the pirate lords is based on real-life pirate lord in Southeast Asia who came from Fujian, China, and her name was Madame Ching. And we had a Madame Ching in Pirates of the Caribbean, and she's wearing pretty ugly looking face powder. And that's what bad face powder will look like, in case you're wondering. It looks like this. So that's my appendix for the first episode of Apothecary Diaries. I'll be uploading more frequently than weekly, just so that we'll catch up to the show progression. Once again, I encourage you guys to actually watch the show, then come back. And if you're interested, listen to my video and then go back and watch the show again. It is quite long, unfortunately, because first episode, there's a lot more things to talk about. Later on, it probably will be shorter because I will be focusing on one or two specific things. So if you guys enjoy this, then feel free to subscribe, so when I do post videos of later episodes, then you guys will get notified right away. I'm hoping that this will contribute to your viewing experience and general understanding of the show. If anything, if it makes you enjoy the show better, that'll be the whole purpose I'm making these videos. So that'll be all. Thank you for listening till the very end. And this is Dragonfly, out.